Welcome to IQ Matrix TV, the home of hundreds of life-altering mind maps. This is Adam, and this is part 1 of a 4-part series of videos where we're going to discuss how to influence people. In this specific video, we're going to look at teaching and using teaching as a method of influence. And the type of influence that we're going to explore here is a very subtle form of influence. It's especially subtle when it comes to teaching. Now, as we work through this map, what I would like you to do is to have a think about the people who had the greatest impact on your life, the people who have influenced you as you were growing up, and even the people who influence you right now. Have a think about how they used teaching methods to shape your character, to shape your life, the way you see the world, and to shape how you handle different situations and circumstances. So when it comes to teaching, one of the keys to teaching is inspiration. We need to be able to find ways to inspire people to be their best selves and to make the best of every situation. And one question you could ask yourself is, how could you or how could I inspire people to become better versions of themselves? Because that's effectively what we're trying to do when it comes to teaching people, and overall when it comes to influencing people. We want to try to help people to become better versions of themselves so that they can be their best selves in every situation and make the best of every situation to help them to accomplish their goals and objectives. So this isn't a very self-centered, selfish type of influence. We're trying to help people, and through teaching we can do that in quite an effective way. So how do we go about this? Well, when it comes to teaching, there are a number of methods we could use. Here I've highlighted that we can use stories, metaphors, analogies, and parables. So we need to build a repertoire of stories and also talk through personal experience, share personal experiences, share stories of personal mistakes and failures. And that can help us to teach other people valuable lessons that can help them to make the best of various situations. As a teacher, you play the role of a role model. You speak from experience, you influence through teaching. And as you teach, this triggers and inspires action in those around you. Specifically, we want to be able to address key lessons. So we want to use stories as a foundation to teach people key lessons about their life and circumstances. And one of the key factors here that is very important when it comes to teaching, and this is why teaching is at the core of influence, is the fact that teaching creates trust and builds respect. If we do not approach influence through the aspect of teaching first, for instance, if we jump to challenging people, which we're going to talk in the second video, or straight into leadership, which we're going to talk in the third video, then we're not going to have that influence. We're not going to have that impact on people's lives. So we need to focus on building trust, focus on generating that respect from people. And that comes through storytelling. Through personal experiences or through sharing stories from other people's experiences. You just need to be that storyteller. You need to be the person who informs, who instructs, who guides. Maybe not so much instructing, but more so guiding people down the right path. The idea behind using teaching as a form of influence is to transform how people think about their life and circumstances. Essentially, we want to transform how people perceive the world around them. We want to change their perspective. We want to shift how they interpret their life experiences. Change how they think about something in optimal and helpful ways. And essentially at the core, and we've already mentioned it before, is to inspire people to be their best selves and to make the best of every situation. And if we can do that, then we can effectively help them to change how they see the world. And if they can see the world in a more optimal way, a more helpful way, through the lessons, through the stories that we teach, then that will help them to make the best of situations and to be their best selves in those situations. So that's essentially at the core of teaching. We must focus on shifting, changing a person's perspective of reality. And as I'm kind of going through this, I want you to have a think about, to continue to think about, as we mentioned at the start of the video, about the people who have transformed your life, who have changed you in a multitude of ways through key lessons that they've taught you from their own personal experiences, through the stories they've shared, through metaphors, analogies, or whatever those experiences were. Have a think about how those people transformed you. Have a think about how they shaped your thoughts, how you see the world, or how you see your circumstances. When it comes to teaching people, we need to focus on three key areas. Specifically, we need to teach people or inspire people, because essentially teaching comes through inspiration. So we need to be able to inspire people to do such and such, or to be in such and such a way. And we, of course, do that through stories and other methods from experience. So we need to be able to inspire people. So that comes about in three ways. We need to be able to inspire people to change how they think about their circumstances, about themselves, and about their problems. Let's dig a little bit deeper in here. So, mentioned here is how people think impacts their behavior and decisions. So, if we can influence how a person thinks about their life, about their circumstances, then that changes the decisions that they make. And those decisions obviously lead them down a certain path into the future. It can either be an optimal path, or it can be a less than optimal path. We obviously want to take them down the optimal path, and that's where these stories can come into play. We want to be able to teach people how to make the most of challenging circumstances. So just right here, make the most of challenging circumstances. That's one of the keys. And if we can go about by helping them to understand key life lessons that will help them to make the most of situations, then that will benefit them tremendously no matter what they decide to do in life. We also need to teach people how to make the best of their problems. And a lot of people, they'll see problems as humongous obstacles, as things that they dread. And yet problems can be tremendous opportunities, and we can help people to see it that way by providing them with key lessons through storytelling, through sharing our own experiences of personal mistakes, of failures, or whatever that may be. So as we zoom out and see what we've just covered, I hope that all of this is starting to sort of come together and make more sense. Doesn't look like there's a lot here, but as we dig further into the map, we start seeing little bits and pieces come out, and we gain deeper and deeper levels of insight. And I hope that you're seeing that as well. Let's just do a quick recap before we jump into some questions that will help us to integrate these ideas into our life. So first of all, we need to focus on teaching. If you want to influence people, you've got to become a teacher, so to speak. You've got to teach people key life lessons. Lessons that can help them make the best of a situation, and also to be their best selves in a situation. And the key aspect here is inspiring. We need to be inspiring teachers. And that's where all the lessons sort of come into play. We need to use stories, speak from personal experience. We need to use metaphors. We can even use examples from, right here, from movies, from books, or from other people's experiences, in order to turn them into key lessons that may help you to influence your kids, influence your friends, influence your work colleagues, influence any other people in your life. Maybe you're a coach of a sports team and you want to influence your players in a certain way. You can use these principles, but this will, of course, take time. We need to be able to prepare ourselves, to prepare these stories, and then understand how we want to influence the people in our lives, how we want to direct them, how we want to influence their choices, decisions, actions, how they see the world. It effectively comes down to perspective. We want to transform their perspective of reality. So I hope that you're starting to see the bigger picture, and you're starting to see how all this is incredibly important when it comes to subtly influencing people. And I hope that you're also thinking about the people who've had the greatest impact in your life, and how they have done so through teaching you key lessons that helps you to build, or helped you to live a better life. Before jumping into the final few questions that will help us to integrate all these ideas, it's important to note that to be an effective teacher, you must essentially become a mentor. Now, I know that's not easy to become a mentor, but you can potentially become a mentor on certain aspects of life and with certain people. And that, of course, comes through storytelling. We need to be able to generate those stories and teach valuable lessons. And that, of course, also comes through experience. Through experience, the more we tell these stories, the better we get. And if we can lead by experience, we can show people the way through our own actions, that in itself creates more trust and because respect because we are doing what we are teaching. Because if we do not do what we teach, then there's no congruence. And congruence is one of these motivational forces that we're going to discuss in the fourth video. No congruence. Oh, right here, no congruence. No congruence. So we need to be able to have congruence in thought, word, and action. Don't just teach these lessons. You need to be able to show. And sometimes the greatest teaching you can do is by showing by example, by doing, so that the other person can see what you're doing and guiding them down the right path in that way. So effectively, all this it's a very indirect, all right here, indirect form of influence. We're not specifically directing people or pushing them towards a certain idea or thought process. What we are doing is we are subtly directing them indirectly, so to speak, towards a certain outcome. And we can do that through our own experiences, or we can do that by sharing different stories. But the congruence factor is very important. We need to be congruent. So don't just teach lessons and then do the opposite. If you just teach lessons and do the opposite, then you won't gain that trust, the respect that you need in order to have influence on other people. And here I just mentioned that explain the lessons contained within each story. That's obviously incredibly important because there's no point in telling a story without really focusing on those lessons. And then under here is what we teach must be relevant and applicable. So there must be benefit, and we'll talk about this in a sec as well, benefit and value to the other person. You can tell a fantastic story. You can tell in a multitude of different ways, but if the other person does not see the benefit, they don't see the value in the story because it's not applicable to their life, it's not going to be influential. It's not going to transform how they see the world, how they see the circumstances, or how they see themselves. Let's now cover some of the questions that we can ask ourselves to fully start to integrate these ideas and concepts into our lives. Questions are, of course, very important because if we ask the right questions, we'll get the right answers. And questions will help us to implement what we are thinking about. So let's go first question. How can I best guide people? So this is the question we're focusing on. How can I best guide people? And then I've got sub-questions here. We'll go through them as well. Then we'll talk about it a little bit. How can you help lead them down the right path? And how can you provide people with the direction they need to get things done? So that essentially lays the foundation of what we want to do as a person of influence. We want to be able to direct people, obviously, down the right path. So we want to do what's best for them. We want to help them make the best of the situation. We want to help them to be their best selves in that situation. That's the key. So here, if I just zoom in a little bit closer, one of the keys here is first we need to choose what lesson to teach, and then we need to decide what story to share. So the lesson needs to come first. We need to first identify where the person is struggling. So I'll put here struggling. How, okay, so where we're struggling, how struggling. So how are they struggling? And then we need to connect that to the lesson, right? We need to connect to the lesson. What lesson could I teach them that will help them to work through their struggles? So for instance, let's say that you have a child who's struggling with their homework and they don't want to do their homework. And you want to be able to influence them to find that self-belief they need to get through their homework, to complete it successfully. So you need to be able to find out, okay, where are they struggling? How are they struggling with their homework? And let's see what kind of lesson could I teach them to maybe help them to persist. What kind of lessons? Maybe there's lessons about determination, that I want to teach them. Maybe lessons about persistence, tense. Maybe patience is another lesson I want to teach. So once we have these lessons, once we know, okay, determination, persistence, and patience, they're the three lessons that I want to teach them. So now we need to decide what story will I share. Maybe it's from my personal experience. Maybe it's from someone else's experience. Maybe it's a movie that they really enjoy. Maybe it's from a cartoon character. Even a cartoon character has numerous sort of experiences, and you can share those experiences and maybe remind your child of how they overcame a certain obstacle that they found difficult or whatever it was. So choose your lesson and then create the story, that experience that you want to be able to share with that person. So now zoom out and have a look at the next question. How can I influence how people think? So now the idea is, okay, well, how can I influence how they think about this situation? So I need to be able to, it comes back to changing their perspective, because it's all about perspective. We need to be able to change that child's perspective about how they see themselves in this situation, how they approach the situation. So two things, how they see themselves and how they approach the situation. Here we've got another question. What would motivate them to think differently about this? And we'll actually talk about that in a little while. And we actually talk about that in the video 4 quite a bit, because that's all about enticing people to do certain things, and it's about helping to trigger certain human desires that will motivate them to take action. So I think you'll enjoy that video immensely. Another question is, how would you like to influence them to think differently, and how will they benefit? So again, that comes down to benefits and values. And I've mentioned this quite a few times within this map because I think it's incredibly important. We need to be able to show them the benefit of, the lesson through our story. Okay, lesson, I'll just write it here a little bit bigger. Lesson through our story. If they don't see the benefits, then there's no point. They're not going to gain the value. So the benefits first for them to gain the value. And then here I write down, I'll zoom in a little bit, list down the benefits the other person will derive from what you teach. So you're effectively moving from lesson to story and then progressing to the benefits. So what benefits will they derive? So if you can identify the benefits, then you can add those benefits to the story. And you can help them see things a certain way that maybe they weren't seeing before. That can help them to get through that hump, get over that obstacle or whatever that may be. Next question is, how can I inspire? And key here is inspire them to think differently about the situation. So again, that comes back to transforming their perspective. But it's not about thinking so much differently about this situation. It's about thinking differently about how they handle the situation. What could you do that would inspire them to take action in a particular direction? So if we go back to the child who's having difficulty struggling to work through their homework, what could you do that would inspire them to take action in a particular direction? We're actually going to talk about it, a bit of it here, so I won't talk about it at this stage. We'll talk about it in a sec, 1 or 2 minutes. Next question is, what would you have to say and how would you need to say things to inspire them to think in more optimal ways? So sometimes it's not so much what we say, but how we say things. And I think I'll write it here. Figure out how you will share your story. So how will you share your story? We started here with the lesson, then the story, right? Then we list the benefits. And now we need to figure out how to share our story. So it's not so much what we say, but how we say it and how we present the story. And how we present it, we're actually going to get to it just below. So let's go to the last question. Yes, this is a long one. How can I convince them of the value of what I teach? So again, this comes back to benefits. We need to be able to present the person with the benefits, the value, so they can see that value from their own perspective. There's no point in us just seeing the value and making it appropriate for our situation. We need them to see the value and make it relevant to their situation. And that's where it comes back to here. What we teach must be relevant and applicable to the other person's situation. Another question here is, what are the other person's motivation triggers? So motivation triggers are these desires that we naturally have. And everyone has a different sort of preference for different motivation triggers. I'll just zoom out just quickly just to show you. In video 4, we're going to talk about 7 specific motivation triggers. We're going to speak about change, contribution, congruence, connection, control, creative expression, and competence, and how we can use those triggers to entice people to make certain decisions. So what I'm going to do is, actually what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to go through them now, as I'm going to go through them in the 4th video. But if you are interested in that, then definitely take a look at that video for more information. What I do want to go over a little bit is these learning preferences. So right here, another great question to ask is, what learning preferences does this person have? So if we're using that child as an example, who's struggling with their homework, doesn't want to do their homework, doesn't have any self-belief, then you need to identify, is that child a visual learner, an auditory learner, or kinesthetic learner? They would probably have a preference for one or the other. So now, if they're a visual learner, you need to be able to present the story, the lesson that you're teaching them. And I'll write here, story plus lesson. I'll write here, plus benefits, right? What we spoke about before. So we need to have all 3 of these in there. So we need to be able to tell the story, the lesson, and provide the benefits in a visual way if they're a very visual person. So what would that involve? That might involve maybe showing them an inspiring movie or film. If someone's very visually oriented, then they're really stimulated by visuals. So maybe show them a picture. Maybe a picture will be inspiring. So as you're telling the story, show them a picture. As you're telling the story, show them a video, whatever that may be. So that's for the visual person. If you got someone who's very auditory, and their learning preference is very auditory nature, they like to listen to things, then maybe as you're telling your story, turn on some music. Maybe some inspiring music in the background can help to trigger certain emotions and stimulate a deeper levels of belief in themselves to work through this successfully. And if they are a kinesthetic person, then this is all about touch. This is all about touch. So this is all about getting them involved. So I write here, getting person involved. Involved in what you're trying to teach them. So maybe that would mean taking them away from this environment, taking them to something where outside, something, somewhere else where you can actually get them physically involved to teach them that lesson. So maybe they need to go through the experience of some kind of example that you're trying to teach them, the lesson that you're trying to share with them. You need to be able to involve them in a certain way, their whole body, their whole mind, physically get them involved in that. And that will help them to fully grasp that idea or that lesson that you're trying to share with them. So that's the key. So I hope you're seeing the value of that, the visual, the auditory, and the kinesthetic person. We need to approach them in a slightly different way. And if you want to, you can, of course, address all 3. Potentially, if someone's you're not sure what preference, then maybe show them a movie, show them a visual, play inspiring music in the background, and get them involved. That by itself could trigger them and could inspire them to gain those valuable lessons that you're trying to teach them, right? And then the final question here is, how could you help this person convince themselves of the value of what you are teaching them? How could you help them to convince themselves? That's interesting, right? How can a person convince themselves? And effectively, the way you help them to convince themselves is by doing this. Exactly what we just spoke about. Address the visual, the auditory, the kinesthetic, or whatever preference they have, and use that to influence what they do, how they think about things, and how they approach circumstances. And essentially, that all comes down to being very suggestive in your approach. So you need to be very suggestive. It's not about, oh, this is how it is, and I'm going to lecture you about what you should be doing in this situation. No, this is all about being very suggestive. That's why we use stories, right? We use stories in a very subtle way. We use stories, we talk from personal experience. We're not trying to put all this external pressure on the person, trying to make them think like they're under pressure now, because we are trying to mold them into a certain individual that maybe they don't see themselves at this stage. We're trying to subtly nudge them in a certain direction. So it's got to be very subtle. If we're not subtle about it, then we're likely to push them away. So any influence that you have, that you create, that you want to create, it's got to be subtle. So I hope that these questions can be of value for you. And you, of course, need to be able to apply these ideas. Start applying them and use these smaller insights here that we've gathered through these smaller text areas to fully start to integrate these concepts into your life. Now, this will take time. This won't be easy. But it's something that you can learn yourself and you learn to master over time. We're all learning this stuff. We're all trying to get better. And if you can do this, then you can transform people's lives in a multitude of ways, in very subtle ways, where they won't even understand or know that they are being influenced by you. I hope that you can now have a think about and maybe connect how people in your life who have taught you key and valuable lessons have now influenced you. How have they influenced your idea, the way you think about your circumstances, yourself, your problems? How have they shifted and changed your perspective? How have they inspired you to take proactive action toward a goal? What lessons, what life lessons have they taught you that are still with you today? We will, of course, continue our journey. This is only the first part. In the second video, we're going to talk about how to challenge people. And challenging people is just another level. It's another step up. We need to be able to truly master the idea of teaching people first before we go and move on to challenging in the second video, then leadership in the third video, and then activating the human desires, the people's desires in the fourth video. So I hope that was of value. I hope that you're starting to see how you can use teaching as a form of influence to help guide people, to help them become their best selves and make the best of situation. And I hope that you will continue along this journey with me as we walk through each branch in further detail, and hopefully by the end you'll gain a deep understanding of what it takes to truly and subtly influence people. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. It truly helps the channel to grow, and definitely subscribe to the channel to see more of these types of videos. We're going to continue exploring not only this topic, but in the future we're going to explore other personal development topics to help you to live your best life. And if you want to download this map, then all the links are below. Check out on the IQ Matrix blog. I've written out a summary of this map, so you can, if you enjoy reading articles, then you can read an article summary of this map that will provide you even more details and information. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.